Hey everyone, buckle up, because today's deep dive is going to be a wild ride. We're exploring the unexpected links between art history and religion.
And trust me, the connections we found while prepping for this were mind-blowing.
I was going through all the materials you sent in, and wow, there's so much more to discover than just dates and names.
Right. We're not doing a boring lecture here. This is about uncovering the hidden stories and moments that make this stuff so fascinating.
Exactly. Like, did you know the very first writer whose name we know wasn't some emperor or philosopher, but a woman?
You're talking about Enheduanna, a priestess in ancient Mesopotamia who was writing hymns over 4,000 years ago. 4,300 to be exact.
4,300 years ago. It's amazing, right? It just hits you how deep these connections between art and spirituality actually go.
Oh, absolutely. And Enheduanna's story is so interesting because it wasn't just about, fulfilling her duties. Her writing came from this really personal place, this connection with the divine.
Right. It's like her faith fueled her art.
Exactly. And that actually links her to so many artists throughout history who poured their souls into their work even when they faced pushback for it. Think about Sappho, that ancient Greek poet. Her work really challenged the norms of her time. Or Dante, whose Divine Comedy, this masterpiece, was actually written in exile.
Wow. So we're seeing how art often comes from these really intense personal experiences, even in the face of adversity. It makes you think about artists today who are pushing boundaries and facing criticism.
Definitely. It's a recurring theme for sure.
And speaking of recurring themes, it's interesting how this idea of art serving a higher purpose, it pops up again and again throughout history. We see it with Enheduanna, and then centuries later, you have someone like Bach, who inscribed SDG Soli Deo Gloria, meaning only for the glory of God, on his musical compositions.
Exactly. For much of history, art wasn't this separate thing from religion. It was deeply, deeply intertwined. Creating art was seen as a way to participate in something bigger than yourself, to connect with the divine.
Okay, so let's head back to where it all began, ancient Mesopotamia. I was really struck by the Epic of Gilgamesh. It grapples with some pretty heavy stuff, like our own mortality. You've got Gilgamesh, this king who's obsessed with finding a way to live forever, and in the end, he learns he can't escape death. There's this one part where a deity tells him basically to just embrace the good things in life because death comes for us all. And it reminded me of the
Epicureanism?
Yes. It's crazy how this ancient Mesopotamian text has this echo of a philosophy that wouldn't even come about for centuries in Greece. The idea that pleasure is the ultimate good, to embrace the here and now.
It's a common thread for sure. But it's also important to remember that for a lot of people, simple pleasure, it wasn't enough. They wanted more. This desire for something deeper, for a real connection with the divine, well, it leads us to Abraham and the birth of Judaism.
Like saying, hey, enjoying life is awesome, but what about, something more, like a deeper meaning, which is where this whole idea of a covenant with God comes in.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not just about believing. It's about an agreement, a real contract with responsibilities on both sides.
Oh, wow. I see. So it's way more binding than just, hoping the gods are feeling nice today.
Exactly. It sets Judaism apart from, like what we were saying about the Mesopotamian gods who could be a bit unpredictable. And hey, speaking of different ways of thinking, there's something that's always bugged me about Michelangelo's Moses.
The horns? You mean those horns on his head?
Yep. That's such a powerful statue. But those horns always seemed a little out of place,
Totally. Like what?
Well, it turns out it's a classic case of lost in translation. See, the original Hebrew text, where Moses comes down Mount Sinai after seeing God, it describes his face as radiating light. But the Hebrew words for ray and horn, they're very similar.
So somewhere along the line, those rays of light, they became horns.
Yep. And that's how we get a horned Moses.
Wow. Talk about a game of telephone, right? It really makes you wonder what other details we might be misinterpreting just because of stuff like that.
It really does.
Which, speaking of, reminds me of another translation thing I've always wondered about. Old Testament. Is that another one of those quirks?
It is. You see, Old Testament can be misleading. Old Covenant is more accurate. And that little change actually makes a huge difference. Well, it highlights that it's not just a bunch of old stories, It's about this sacred agreement, this contract between God and Abraham's descendants.
So it's like the foundation for everything that comes after.
Exactly. And it makes that story about Abraham and the three angels even more important, the one in Rublev's icon, the Trinity.
Oh, right. It's often called Abraham's hospitality, right? But there's obviously way more to it than just like Abraham being a good host.
Exactly. It's not just a simple scene. It's packed with symbolism.
Yeah.
Like, those aren't just any three visitors. They're the Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And the way they're sitting, their outlines forming a circle. That speaks to their unity.
Wow, I never would have caught that. See, this is why I love deep dives.
And there's more. Even the setting is symbolic. The house represents God the Father, the Creator. The tree, that's Christ and his sacrifice. And the mountain peak, that represents the Holy Spirit.
It's mind-blowing how much meaning is packed into a single image. I feel like I need to go back and look at it with, like, a magnifying glass.
And you might need a magnifying glass for this next part. If you take a close look at the middle angel's clothing, notice anything familiar about it?
Well, now that you mention it, the colors, the red and the blue, and the way the fabric drapes, it kind of reminds me of Christ in Da Vinci's Last Supper.
You got it. That's totally intentional. It's a detail that most people miss, but Rublev created a visual connection across time and Testament. He wove those New Testament ideas right into this Old Testament story.
That's amazing. He's bridging thousands of years of, theological development? And he does it in the folds of a robe. You've got to give him credit for subtlety.
Oh, absolutely. And we haven't even gotten to that cup on the table. It's not just decoration, That cup, it often symbolizes sacrifice. And look at how the outlines of the left and right angels, they form the shape of a bigger cup, with the middle angel right in the center.
Wait, I think I see it. It's like the middle angel is inside that cup shape. Knowing Rublev, that's got to be significant, right?
Totally. And this is where it gets super interesting. It's not just about the symbolism in the icon. It's about how Rublev pulls us, the viewers, into the experience too. And he does that through a technique called reverse perspective. Have you ever noticed how the lines of the angel's feet, they don't go back into the background like you'd expect? They actually point toward the viewer.
So instead of the image drawing you in, it's almost like it's reaching out to you.
Exactly. And get this. If you were to, imagine those lines continuing from the angel's feet, where do you think they'd end up?
Right here, in front of the icon. Where I'm standing, no way.
Yes, wait. Rublev put the viewer directly in line with that cup of sacrifice. We become participants in that moment.
That's incredible. It's like he's inviting us into this sacred conversation. So it's not just a pretty picture. It's like a whole experience.
You really is.
And it's designed to, make you feel something, not just think about it.
Exactly. And that's what makes this icon, and I think so much religious art throughout history, so powerful.
Right.
It's not just about aesthetics.
Right.
It's about conveying something much deeper
Mm-hmm.
and inviting the viewer to really think about these profound ideas.
It makes you realize how much you might miss if you're just, glancing at art.
Oh, for sure.
There are entire stories, debates, centuries of tradition, all hiding in plain sight.
Absolutely. And it makes you wonder, if one icon can hold this much meaning,
Right?
what about all the art around us today? What messages are being sent intentionally or not through the art we create and consume?
That is a powerful thought to end on. It's like this deep dive has given me a whole new lens to see the world through, Not just art from the past, but the art being made right now, too.
It's amazing what you discover when you really start digging into this stuff.
It really is. Well, thanks for taking us on this journey. It's been eye-opening. And for everyone listening, I hope this sparked your curiosity to keep exploring these connections between art, history, and faith. You might be surprised by what you find. Until next time, happy diving.